Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. It is so great to have you here. I am Martin Andrews, Creative Director at inquirED, and welcome to Designing for Depth, Giving Writing Its Due in Early Literacy. Today's session is all a part of a broader series we're calling Designing for Depth, and it's a space where we explore what it really means to design high-quality, research-informed curriculum for pre-K through grade 2. Across the series, we hope to examine different strands of early literacy and curriculum design, asking what it looks like to move beyond surface coverage toward coherence, rigor, and deeper, more meaningful teaching and learning. Now, designing for depth means thinking carefully about what we emphasize, what we structure explicitly, and what we sometimes unintentionally leave behind. And over the past several years, a growing understanding of the science of reading has reshaped early literacy instruction. We've had important conversations about phonemic awareness, decoding, fluency, and knowledge building, but one strand of literacy that remains undertaught and underdesigned, that's writing. If reading is the headline, then writing is often the fine print. And yet we know the research is clear. Writing instruction strengthens word reading, it deepens reading comprehension, it builds knowledge and thinking skills, and it improves writing, which is an important communicative ability in its own right. So when we design for depth in pre-K through grade 2, writing can't be an afterthought. It has to be explicit, it has to be scaffolded, and it has to give students something meaningful to write about. And so today we'll explore what it looks like to give writing its due in early literacy, grounded in research, aligned to science, and alive with real intellectual curiosity. And so we are honored to begin with Dr. Nell Duke, whose work has shaped the field's understanding of early literacy development, and then extend that conversation into K2 with Elisabeth Ventiling Simon. So, Nell, if you can join us. Nell is the executive director of the Center for Early Literacy and Learning Success at Stand for Children and a professor of education and psychology at the University of Michigan. Her work centers on the right to literacy and literacy development, birth through age 8. She earned her master's and doctorate in human development and psychology with a concentration in language and literacy from Harvard University. For 24 years, Nell served full-time as a professor of education and psychology, first at Michigan State University and then at the University of Michigan. She is an elected member of the National Academy of Education and a Reading Hall of Fame inductee. She's also co-director and literacy lead of Great First 8, a groundbreaking full-day curriculum for children birth through age 8. Nell, I am so glad to welcome you and hand this off to you and let you dive in.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Martin. And thank you to many people who are here today, who are listening to the recording later. I'm so glad you're joining us for this topic that is maybe not hot, but is certainly important, and that's writing development in pre-K and TK. So here's a brief overview. I'm going to talk briefly about the importance of early writing and then dive into how we support writing development in pre-K TK. Obviously, I can't talk about everything today, but I am going to talk some about supporting phonemic awareness and alphabet instruction, handwriting support, how we do interactive and scaffolded writing to support writing development. I'm going to talk about writing and play a little bit, translanguaging in writing, and writing instruction within real world genres and for real world purposes. So first, the importance of early writing. So probably obvious to you, but one of the things that we see in research is that children's early writing is predictive of their later writing. In other words, if we get a good foundation in writing development, that supports kids longitudinally, whereas children who have a weaker development of writing in the early years tend to also have weaker writing later. So we know that we want to get kids off to a good start. And in fact, research shows that if we do get kids off to a good start in writing, that it makes a difference. We also know from research that writing instruction supports reading development. A number of meta-analyses have shown that. Also, probably not surprising, reading development supports writing development. So these two are really reciprocal in nature. Here are a couple of examples. Estimated spelling, that is children thinking of how they think a word might be spelled based on what they currently know about how to segment words and about letter-sound relationships, or more correctly, phoneme-grapheme relationships. That actually, contributes to reading development as well, because estimated spelling supports phonemic awareness development, which of course is necessary for reading. Another example is that when children write in a particular genre, say they write informational articles, it actually makes them better readers of that genre. For example, better readers of informational articles. Early writing also provides a window into children's development. You can see what children are understanding about print and about writing when you look at their writing in a way that you can't actually see that in the reading process, right? It's more evident in writing, so that's wonderful. And then finally, of course, when we enable young children to write, we give them a voice inside and outside the classroom. We give them another way to communicate and to be heard. So let's talk briefly about writing in terms of phonemic awareness and writing development. So we know that to spell words, you have to have phoneme segmentation. That is, you need to be able to break words up into the smallest sounds that distinguish one word from another. Particularly critical in pre-K is that children leave pre-K having initial phoneme segmentation. So that is at least the ability to isolate the first sound in words. That's a key skill. Other more complex phonemic segmentation will come later, but getting at least that first sound by the time they enter kindergarten is really important. So being able to recognize, for example, that the first sound in dog is d, that the first sound in sheep is sh, and the first sound in eagle is e. There are fun and playful ways to do this. We do not have to do this through drill or children chanting or repeating after you. So for example, in our curriculum in pre-K, we have a puppet named Picky Crocky. Picky Crocky is very picky. He will only eat things that begin with the sound that's being featured on that day. So for example, when children are studying the letter F, he will only eat foods that start with F. And feel free to drop into chat what you think would be a great food for Picky Crocky to eat. Now, of course, alphabet knowledge is also critical to writing development. In order to spell words, you have to have some alphabet knowledge. And the goal based on research is that children will know most of the alphabet by the time they enter kindergarten. Research suggests the benchmark doesn't need to be every single letter, but they do need to know a number of their letters by that point in time. Now, it used to be that people thought that in preschool, alphabet instruction should just be embedded in authentic experiences like with books or only come up when children ask. But we now understand that more effective in pre-K is decontextualized alphabet instruction along with those embedded opportunities. So decontextualize meaning you're just focused on alphabet instruction, you're doing that systematically, and you're focusing on the letters and sounds. You're not necessarily, doing that in the context of a book or something. So you want some decontextualized alphabet instruction, such as what you see being engaged in on the screen. Now, of course, writing also requires handwriting. And when we're thinking about handwriting in pre-K, we first of all want to make sure that we're developing fine motor skills in general, and so that we're strengthening all of those muscles that children have that they'll be recruiting when they write and do other important tasks. But we want to be very particularly concerned with grip in pre-K. So we want to help children get to where they're holding the pencil with either a tripod or a quadrupod, dynamic tripod or dynamic quadrupod grip. If you don't know what I'm talking about, no worries. But if you Google those phrases, that will help you know how we want to move children's. And then there are some fundamental strokes that we want to focus on in the pre-K years. You might know like vertical and horizontal lines are easier for children than diagonal lines. We need kids to begin to be able to make curves and hooks. And so fundamental strokes and fundamental vocabulary about marking is a really important focus for pre-K. That will enable children to be better positioned for the formal handwriting instruction that they should receive in kindergarten. We also, in pre-K, many standards documents call for kids to be able to write their name. And you can see how name writing development here can really proceed over time. Also, this is a free app that you can access through a URL. So it's not in the App Store, but through the URL starwriter.org, where children can practice some early handwriting. And this section here is a pre-writing kind of section that you might want children to explore. They'll need headphones and a tablet, an Apple iPad ideally. Okay, so another way that we support children's development in writing is through a technique called interactive writing, which has been tested in pre-K and shown to be effective at supporting children's literacy development. In interactive writing, we start with a launch. We give kids a purpose and an audience for writing. For example, maybe they're going to write a thank you note to someone in the school. And then we negotiate with kids to figure out what the first part of that, usually a sentence, what the first sentence of that piece of writing is going to say. So bringing in children's voice there and coming up with the message. And then you verbally rehearse the message with children. So say the sentence repeatedly with children until they've really internalized what they're going to say and where it's going to be said. And then in interactive writing, we share the pen. So there's parts of the interactive writing where the children will take turns. The children will actually be doing some of the writing. They might also be doing some of the illustrating. The teacher is still the primary or the lead writer into interactive writing. Okay, so the teacher is going to write most of it, but children are brought in to share the pen, and they're asked to share the pen in those situations where they are right at that moment of what they're learning to be able to do. I'll talk more about that in a minute. So here you see an example of a thank you note to Nurse Kelly. And you can probably tell from the handwriting that a good chunk of it was written by the teacher, but some of that was written by children. And we've highlighted in yellow for you what the children drew or wrote. And I think one of the things that you'll notice here is that for the most part, the teacher was focusing on children picking out those, this is a kindergarten sample, picking out those first and last sounds in words and picking up some middle sounds and a little bit in terms of some high frequency words that they have been taught. So here's what it might sound like inside interactive writing. The teacher might say, "What's our next word?" And children might say nurse. And the teacher might say, "What sound do you hear at the beginning of nurse?" And if needed, the teacher might say nurse. And then children will say n, and the teacher will say what letter spells that sound. And children will hopefully say n, or N, sorry, and then the teacher will either model writing N, or if there's a child who is able to do that, would invite a child to write N, or they might make a dotted line N for a child to trace, and so on. Once the message is written, children will read and reread it with the teacher pointing and leading the reading, just to reinforce for children that they have written a meaningful message and that the print reflects the speech that they agreed on. They might illustrate it depending on the task. And then to close, they want to return to the purpose and audience of the writing task. So for example, that letter was for Nurse Kelly, so they need to get that letter to Nurse Kelly. One of the things that's really nice about interactive writing is that every child can contribute to interactive writing in some way. And so if you wouldn't mind, I'd love for you to just drop in the chat some way that you think a child could contribute. So maybe they could write a particular letter. What else could they do to contribute to a piece of interactive writing? Go ahead and drop that in the chat. Great. So they could generate ideas. So that's a major way. They could offer punctuation. They could offer drawing. Absolutely count the number of words in the sentence. So if they're going to write, "Thank you, Nurse Kelly," how many words is that? That's really great phonological awareness opportunity for kids. Words within a speech stream. They can help tell a neighbor their idea, word choice, add adjectives or description. Oh, so many great things in the chat. I knew this would be a group with lots of ideas. And I've just put a few here on this slide, but nothing I think that you didn't already think of. And thank you. Yes, signing your name is great. Wonderful. And a little tip there, which I appreciate. Yes, if you have, say, a group of 4 children in pre-K that you're working with together on interactive writing, because the research on interactive writing at pre-K, it's typically done in small groups, or I think all of the studies have been done in small groups. While one child is doing the writing, other children might be practicing on whiteboards or a piece of paper. Great. Okay. So another technique that we can have in our toolbox is scaffolded writing. Unlike interactive writing, where the teacher is the lead writer, in scaffolded writing, the child is the lead writer. We'll ask the child what message they want to write. We'll repeat that message with the child over and over again so they really have it internalized, which means you need to make sure that when you're negotiating with the child that you've made it a pretty short message. And then you'll draw one line for each word in the message using either a highlighter, that's my preference, or a pen to sort of underline or marker. But a highlighter can be, I think particularly helpful for kids in pre-K. And when you do that, you want the length of the lines to more or less match the length of the words. And then you have children write one word per line. So they're going to point to each line and say the message with you before they start writing. And then once they've written one word per line, they'll read and reread the message. Now, like interactive writing, one of the nice things about scaffolded writing is that there are many ways for children to engage depending on where they are in their development. So, for example, you might have a toddler where you're working with scaffolded writing, or could be a 3 or 4 year old who hasn't had much time yet in preschool, where they may scribble in each of where the words would go. And that actually, in and of itself, is growth, right? Because it means that they're understanding that marks go in these highlighted areas. They understand that the mark should look sort of writing like, and they may have even put those marks in from left to right, top to bottom, which would show directionality. Now, the next stage that you might see is that children engage in their scaffolded writing by making letters and letter-like forms that don't actually correspond to sounds yet. So they understand you're supposed to put letters there. They know some letters to write or some things that sort of look like letters to write, but they aren't yet actually representing sounds with the letters that they write. Still, lots and lots to celebrate here in terms of children's growth. This is the target, or where we'd like to see kids be at a minimum by the end of pre-K. Here what we see is that children have actually, the message is, I love ice cream. So they've actually represented at least one sound in each word. I love ice cream. And it does not bother us at this age if they use a K for cream. That's completely fine. That is a letter that would plausibly represent the sound, and they'll learn later about the conventional spelling of that word. So this is a terrific accomplishment for children because it really has children demonstrating a lot of the things that we want to see by end of pre-K. Initial phoneme segmentation, left to right, top to bottom directionality, concept of word, the ability to spell specific sounds using their knowledge of alphabet letters and so forth. Children won't get necessarily every single word for various reasons we don't have time to get into, but we'd like to see that much of children's writing looks like this by end of pre-K. So that is our target. They may get further. So here's I love ice cream, where there is representation of more of the sounds in the words. And then, of course, as they move into kindergarten, still more. Another important piece of writing development in pre-K is encouraging writing and play. So part of that means we need a rich base of oral language and lots of writing materials. So lots of talk, right? Talk and writing are both expressive language processes, and writing is not going to develop well if there isn't a very strong base of oral language underneath it. Having materials everywhere is really helpful in the classroom. The more you have materials, the more that children will use them. And then as a teacher, we want to model incorporating writing into play and prompt children to write during play. So actually say, could we make a sign, or is there something that you'd like to write to go with your whatever they're doing in their play? This is a fun one from a classroom visit I did last week. A group of children were building a rocket ship in the construction station, and they needed this rocket ship to go much faster than any rocket ship had gone before. So one of the boys wrote power double and stuck it on the rocket ship, and that's what was going to make the rocket ship go further. I don't think that child would have done that if there weren't pencils and sticky notes right there in the construction station. Here's some more images from encouraging writing in play. This is a movie theater imaginative play theme, again, that I got to see just last week. So this is part of a movie theater, and I'm hoping that you're seeing here all of the ways that children are contributing their writing and their drawing to that movie theater. And you can see some examples here of some scaffolded writing as well as some independent writing. And then I loved this in another classroom. The child was doing a showing of the movie Batman. So they they had made Batman here. And then at the end, there was this, and it was explained to me that these are credits. So that was really fun. Okay, translanguaging is something that we need to make sure we're keeping in mind with writing. Translanguaging is using one's full linguistic repertoire, meaning all of the languages and dialects and gestures and objects and everything we have at our disposal to communicate. And it's really important for children to have those opportunities to translanguage. Orally, you would hear something like "more agua, please," which you can see uses both Spanish and English to communicate, or "está raining," same thing. But this can also happen in writing. So for example, in this particular case, we have Spanish, Spanish, English. So we want to encourage and welcome and celebrate when children are using translanguaging in their own work. Some of the ways you can do that using translanguaging yourself can model for children, including books in which there are multiple languages or multiple dialects being spoken, valuing and communicating your valuing of all languages and dialects, learning about children's families and languages so that you even know what the children wrote, that you don't think it's a random letter string, but you actually know it's that language. And then just promoting positive attitudes toward language diversity. And this is a book that colleagues and I wrote for NACCE on literacy development 0 to 5, and it has quite a bit more information about how to support translanguaging. It's a big topic for a short presentation. Last thing I want to talk about is writing in real world genres. Some of you have probably seen this before. I've used this example for years. I think it's so marvelous. But a child wrote a birthday list, a letter, a map, and a story page. And you see so many ways that it reflects what, these different genres. Feel free to drop into the chat what's something that they know about a particular genre. What do they know about lists or about letters or about story pages or maps? So go ahead and give that some thought. That's the most precious thing I've ever seen. Thank you. Yeah, they know things like lists are vertical arrangements of names, and a list can have items that are separate, and story pages may have writing and they may have illustrations. Absolutely. And notice that they're separated, whereas in a map, they're all integrated. I mean, this child knows so much about genre. And so it illustrates why it's so important for us to have opportunities for children to write in real world genres in pre-K. These girls are working on a shopping list. This group of kids did interview questions that they wrote. And it's just so important to have those projects in which kids are writing for real world purposes and audiences. Twigs and bark, we see here, for example, in a nature museum that children had written. And here children wrote, "This wall is sad and empty." And they go on to talk about they've filled the wall, so it's no longer sad and empty. So to summarize, early writing is important. There's lots of ways to develop it, and here are some of the things that we need to do to make sure that every child is able to write, because indeed the world is filled with good stuff. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Now, I kind of want to ask you and make a bridge here between these two really important developmental stages, or multiple developmental stages. Like, you've helped us understand some of what strong research-aligned writing instruction looks like in pre-K as they move into kindergarten and the primary grades. I'm wondering what shifts developmentally and what stays constant, and what should we be carrying forward from those early years of instruction?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, everything I talked about should carry on into kindergarten and first grade in terms of the different aspects of writing we're developing. So we should keep working on phonemic awareness and handwriting and genre and spelling, and all those important areas continue at least into kindergarten and first grade, more on an as needed basis for handwriting and phonemic awareness instruction by the time we get to second grade. So definitely we want a lot of carry through. Of course, in K1 too, something that's different is that we're expecting kids to become increasingly strategic, using more and more writing strategies in their work. And we're expecting kids to move toward more conventional writing, more conventional spellings, more conventional use of punctuation, and so on. What I hope, though, in that process that we don't lose is that playful approach and that attention to purpose and audience for writing as, a communicative act. We want to continue to have that emphasis throughout the K2 years.
Yeah, and that's a great segue to Elisabeth. Elisabeth, if you can join us here, I'm going to kind of turn it over to you.
Yeah. As Nell has already described, writing is both brain work and body work. So let's think about our second grader at the end of our K2 band here. They are generating ideas. They're holding a sentence in their working memory. They're spelling words. They're managing punctuation and spacing. They're controlling their hand muscles. They're thinking about their message and what a reader needs. So writing takes a lot of effort for all of us across ages. And we have to remember at the beginning of kindergarten, our kindergarten classes include such a wide range of entry points. So some are not quite 5, others are over 6. Some have been in a strong pre-K program and have a strong foundation for writing in a program like Nell described, and others are having their very first school experience. So this is an enormous developmental span, cognitively, linguistically, physically, at the beginning of K2 and really spanning K2. So this means that the foundational work that Nell just described in pre-K is not completed when kids start kindergarten. It's going to continue throughout K2. So they're still learning phonemic awareness, spelling, they're deepening alphabet knowledge, they're applying that in transcription, and they're building their handwriting fluency, they're building fine motor control, especially in early kindergarten. So these foundational skills are still really critically important. They don't end in pre-K. And we know that all of these things can be barriers to writing when students don't have those. Because again, writing takes a lot of effort and there's just a lot to learn. And we're thinking about, in our context in curriculum design, how the motivation and payoff for writing, it works differently from reading. We know that reading is complex. It takes a lot of effort too, as students are decoding, they're applying vocabulary knowledge, language comprehension, sustained attention. But when we read something interesting, our brains get an immediate reward for that effort, right? We learn something new, we laugh, we feel suspense, we feel transported. The reward is really built into the act itself if we're reading something that's engaging for us. Writing isn't necessarily as immediately rewarding in the moment. So at a very high level, strong K2 writing instruction needs to do 2 things. We need to remove barriers and build knowledge and skills so that writing feels doable. And we also want to design for motivation. We want to be creating purpose for writers so that the effort they have to put in feels worth it. I'd love to just invite participants in the chat, in one word, in your experience, what helps writing feel doable for students or motivating for students in your context? Yeah, I see choice, audience, relevance, celebrating when you're finished. Yes, absolutely. Understanding what their writing should look like when they feel like they know what they're doing. Yeah, having that confidence and that engagement with the task connected to emotions. Yeah, that's a really great example too. Thank you all. Keep those ideas coming. So we're thinking about all of those things. Let's start with removing barriers. We're thinking about how removing barriers means reducing the cognitive overload and the anxiety that can make writing feel overwhelming for young learners. And we can do that in 4 ways. We can build bridges, more than 4 ways, but what we have time to talk about right now. Building bridges between oral language and written language, providing explicit writing instruction, increasing our frequency, and building knowledge. So starting with oral language, we know oral language is foundational in K2, starting in pre-K, and students are doing so much work orally. They're applying vocabulary, they're thinking about sentence structure, grammar, syntax, they're practicing narrative skills, sequencing, elaborating, telling stories, they're applying reasoning when they're using words like because or so, they're practicing discourse, and they're building confidence and identity as communicators. It's not small work at all. It's literacy development in real time as they're engaging in discussion. And All of those skills students are building as they express ideas are preparing them to write. And we know most students can say complex ideas long before they can write them fluently. And so talk is helping them express those ideas. It's reducing that cognitive load. It's helping them externalize thinking, and it lets students articulate ideas before the physical demands of writing enter the picture. So it's not something that goes away in K2 at all. It doesn't go away once they pick up the pencils and they begin to develop greater mastery. It's going to really continue to support writing across K2 and really beyond in older grades as well. So in strong writing instruction, we want to see students verbally rehearsing sentences before they write, reading drafts out loud to hear how their writing sounds, to hear clarity and rhythm, sharing their written ideas with a partner, giving and receiving feedback through structured conversation and thinking about how they might improve their writing. Talk is it's surrounding writing, it's scaffolding it, it's strengthening it. And if we treat oral language as separate from writing, we lose its power, we miss its power. And when we treat it as a bridge and as an ongoing support, we can really reduce some big barriers for writing. I would love to hear in your contexts, in the students that you're serving, maybe one discussion or oral routine that you use that helps students prepare themselves to write. Love these, yeah. Turn and talk, drawing it, write in the air with a partner. Nell says one suggestion is emphasize those choices children do have in response to the choice question. For example, perhaps they are required to write an informational text about ocean animals, but they get to select which ocean animal, or perhaps they get to choose how to best grab a reader's attention. Yeah. Amplifying that choice and giving choice where it's possible. Oral rehearsal. Yeah. Let's talk about explicit writing instruction as well. We know writing doesn't become independent through just opportunities for practice alone. Students need to see writing, they need to try it with support, and they need a pathway toward independence. So we don't want to just give opportunities to write or to require students to write responses without instruction. We want to model thinking, we want to write frequently in front of students, practice together, and use repeatable strategies and tools that they can kind of take on over time and gradually release that responsibility for writing. So when we're talking about explicit instruction, we want to continue to develop those foundational skills that Nell mentioned: phonemic awareness, handwriting, alphabet knowledge. All of these things are a really critical foundation for writing. And as we move into K2, we're also talking about teaching across sentence level construction. We're thinking about constructing a composition and providing explicit instruction in how to compose a composition with multiple ideas. How are we telling a story or constructing a paragraph, writing a letter, using a process to create and refine those compositions within a genre for a particular purpose, for a particular audience. So let's start at the sentence level. Sentences there are building blocks, there are bricks for longer compositions. In K2, sentence instruction is a really high leverage move we can make to build strong writing. Students are going to need a lot of support in writing sentences that are complete, clear, meaningful. In kindergarten, that's going to begin with orally rehearsing a complete idea, drawing to represent an idea, dictating sentences during shared or modeled writing, and just learning what makes a sentence a whole thought. And as we grow into grade 1 and beyond, sentence instruction doesn't go away, it expands. We might be expanding sentences together, add where, add when, add how. We might combine two short ideas into a longer sentence. We might study a mentor sentence from the text we're reading and ask, what makes this sentence work? How does the author's word choice convey a particular idea or an emotion? How can we learn from that and bring that to our own writing? We might revise a shared sentence together to make it more clear, to make it more impactful for a reader. And we also want to give students repeatable tools. We use an acronym, CAPS, to help them internalize concepts and begin to self-regulate over time. So this is something they might use as a checklist in shared evaluation of a sentence early. And then over time, they've internalized this and they're just automatically noticing, is it capitalized? Is this a complete thought? Have I added punctuation? Is this spacing right? And that helps them build stronger sentences over time. And it's important to note that all of this isn't just about correctness, it's about effective communication. So thinking about, in our context in the design of curriculum, we aren't aiming for isolated grammar instruction. We are teaching conventions in the service of the ideas about the content that students want to communicate, and trying to really infuse purpose to sentence level construction across the board. Students also need explicit instruction in how to organize multiple ideas. So as they move toward creating a narrative or writing a paragraph, they're thinking about how writing is structured across different genres. And this involves teaching genre-specific structures and conventions. So for example, we use TIDE in the creation of grade 1, a ELA curriculum, for informational writing. Helps students internalize that an informational paragraph needs to have a topic sentence, T, important details to support that topic, ID, and then an ending sentence. We use the C acronym for narrative writing because it requires a different structure. We're thinking about setting the stage, introducing characters and setting, describing events in order, and then providing an ending sentence. So tools like that help students, again, internalize structures and begin to kind of self-regulate over time. This also involves helping students understand writing as a process, not one and done. So strong writers are generating ideas, they're selecting and organizing their ideas, they're writing, revising, editing, sharing their ideas. And this doesn't come automatically either. So just like sentence level work, this involves modeling these phases. What does it mean to generate ideas? How are we selecting our ideas? What does it mean to revise? So we want to look for lots of opportunities to practice together with support and a gradual release of responsibility over time as these processes become more internalized and as students get more practice. Removing barriers is not just about instruction, it's also about frequency. Frequent writing helps kids build fluency and confidence. It builds the sense that writing is just what we do. So we want to really aim for regular opportunities to put ideas into words and to help students see themselves as writers. When it's not frequent, it can feel like a big event. And when it's a big event, it can create anxiety. But when writing happens all the time in small, manageable, low stakes ways, it becomes normal, it becomes routine, less intimidating. So that means in our context, we really want to see students writing every day. That means that most writing in K2, at least for us, is not long, it's not polished, and that's intentional. It's happening in many forms. They might be labeling, quick writes, single sentences, short responses, shared writing. In early kindergarten, they may be drawing to represent their idea and attempting a few letters. They're not warm-ups, they're not filler. They are how students are building stamina and fluency without overwhelm. And when it's frequent, when it's low stakes, they begin to practice writing without fear, without anxiety. And so that can help us remove some of those big barriers for writing. Just make it feel routine, make it feel low stakes, make it feel fun. I also want to really emphasize the importance of knowledge. In the ELA space, we spend a lot of time talking about how knowledge supports reading comprehension. And we know the more students know, the more they can understand what they read, make inferences, use context clues, follow complex ideas. That same foundation of knowledge supports writing. We can't write well about something that we don't understand. And so when students have just really surface level knowledge, their writing is also going to stay surface level. But when they've built deeper understanding, even in K2, they've built expertise. And when they've studied something over a period of time, their writing changes. They can write with more specificity, richer vocabulary, clearer explanations, stronger evidence, better reasoning. Knowledge is going to reduce a major writing barrier, and it's going to provide motivation because students actually have something meaningful to communicate, and they have an opinion, they have something to say, and they're not just writing for the sake of writing. And that brings us to our second half of the question as we're thinking about designing for motivation and what makes writing feel worth the effort. We can reduce barriers, we can teach skill, we can teach sentence construction, paragraph structure, but writing is still going to take effort. And if kids don't really see a reason to do that work, it is going to make that effort not feel worth it. If writing feels like something the teacher wants me to do, it feels like compliance rather than communication. But if writing feels like something I want to say, then everything changes. So knowledge plays a big role here when students have a real conclusion, not just write about this topic, but what do you think? Why did this happen? What should happen? They have something meaningful to say. Purpose and audience are also really critical to motivation. I'm going to think about what is the reason, the authentic reason that students might have to communicate an idea. Maybe they're going to explain, persuade, inform, inspire their reader in some way. And they know they have an audience, whether it's a buddy class, community members, there's a real reader. And this also will motivate different writing. They're going to want to add detail. They will be motivated to clarify their thinking, to revise, not just because we told them to, but because they want their message to land. That's motivation. That's when writing can become meaningful and purposeful in the minds of the students. So as we zoom out, designing writing for depth really comes down to a few of these essential commitments. Kids need to write often, not occasionally, not during a writing unit only, but often enough that it feels routine and normal. They need to see writing modeled. They need to watch adults think and draft and revise and make decisions in real time. And they need to share in that as well. They need explicit help building strong sentences and paragraphs. We can't assume they'll just pick it up. And they need real expertise, real ideas worth expressing. A depth of knowledge changes what they're able to say and their motivation to communicate that. And they need a reason to communicate, an audience and a purpose that makes the conclusion worth sharing with someone else and worth refining so that that message really hits home.
Thanks so much, Elisabeth. And I'd like to invite Nell to come back on and join us. Gina's question, which I think has a lot to do with that purpose, is she said, should the majority of writing be aligned to what is being read or learned about in K2? I'd love to hear, Elisabeth, what you had to say about that, and then maybe Nell also the pre-K perspective as well.
Well, certainly in our context, the majority of writing is aligned what students are learning about, but what students are learning about is transferred to their own context as well. So they might be writing about what they've read, they might be writing about the topic based on multiple things that they've read, or to communicate a conclusion that they've drawn themselves. And they might also be thinking about how can I take what I've learned into my own context, into the world around me. And that's worthy of writing too. That's worthy of expressing ideas. And so both. Yes, a majority of writing is connected to that content. And I would say that we can connect to the content in our own context as well.
I think in pre-K, we definitely want to have some writing that children are doing that is related to whatever that particular unit is focused on. So for example, in our curriculum, we have a unit called Farm to Table, and children are studying foods and where they come from. And one of their writing projects is to write about their family's favorite food and where it comes from on a placemat that will then be shared. So, obviously that's very tightly aligned to what kids are learning about at that particular project. But if a child is writing double double power while they're playing rocket ships and that doesn't happen to be what we're studying at that moment, that's also fine in pre-K. So I think in pre-K we want to have the door wide open for children to do spontaneous writing that's of interest to them in whatever topic and communicative purpose and audience. And then we do want to also have some writing that is tightly related to the knowledge building that they're doing as a class.
Mm. Beth asked, and I will say that probably the easiest way to answer Beth's question. She asked, are there any open source research articles from the last 5 years you suggest exploring around this topic? And now I see you nodding your head. There are probably many that you can, maybe afterwards, you can send those to me and I can include them in the email. That might be the easiest way to do that. One of the questions that we got from the Q&A is the homeschool connection when it comes to writing. How do you talk to caregivers about what students are learning in writing and extend that learning into the home? And I know Great First Aid has a lot of supports for home and family. So Nell, can you tell us maybe about how you can involve the caregivers in the writing instruction that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So at pre-K, one of the things we do is have regular text and video messages that teachers can copy and paste into whatever platform they use for communicating with families that give suggestions for activities that families can do together that connect well to what children are learning. And some of those are writing opportunities. So the idea of writing a card for a relative, for example, is one of the kinds of activities that we might include in those text and video messages. So certainly just, drawing families' attention to opportunities to write and also welcoming, families' own contributions. In fact, I was on a webinar earlier today in which a teacher shared that a child in her class and that child's brother had written a thank you note to the school's custodian and brought it into school. They'd worked on it over the weekend and brought it in on Monday. And just celebrating all those opportunities to bring writing from home into school and school into home. And of course, once one child does that or the teacher encourages that to happen, it kind of can snowball and become a really regular part of what's happening. So that's one strategy I would recommend. Another is a somewhat more formal strategy that we use in K2, and of course, welcoming Elisabeth to add to this as well. But once children have had a good amount of experience with a particular genre they've been studying, including in the homework choice board, or however homework is handled for us, it's homework choice board, to include in that homework choice board an opportunity for children to write other texts in that same genre and to do that at home, and just alerting families to the fact that children have recently learned a particular way of writing that they could extend in the home environment. So those are two ideas.
Those are great. When we talk about, we've used this, and someone in the chat used this as well. When we talk about students' identity as a writer, uh, it's something that we think about in reading as well, an identity as a reader, but it seems to be more associated with writing. Could you both talk a little bit about forming an identity as a writer?
Elisabeth, you want to start?
Sure. Writing and speaking, students are expressing their own ideas. So that's how I think of a distinction. When I'm thinking of identity as a reader, I'm thinking about how I approach reading, what I love to read, but my identity as a writer is what I'm expressing, how I'm expressing it, my audience. So what is who am I trying to reach? And when we're thinking about removing barriers, creating motivation, what are the ways that students are building confidence as well? Writing is a way that I communicate. It's not something that I'm avoiding or that I'm scared of. It's something that I'm comfortable with, and I'm tuned into writing. The example with the credits is like a perfect example where picking up a pencil and conveying those ideas as a writer is something that's going to develop over time. Whereas some students might automatically think of themselves as artists or as musicians or as singers. We want all students to see themselves as writers, as a means to communicate.
Yeah, agree. I think in pre-K, I can't emphasize enough the importance of name writing as a way to develop an identity as a writer. For most children, it's the first thing that they write that sort of really, it's like a landmark of, communicating this is my paper, or this is my piece of artwork, or this is my toy I brought from home. And there is some research to suggest that writing is a linchpin for children's development. Well, so there's research to suggest that children are more likely to learn the letters in their name sooner than one would otherwise expect. So the name, I think, is one of the first stepping stones to really to developing an identity as a writer. I also just want to double stamp something Elisabeth said about, writing is communication. And so with young children, giving them lots of opportunities to speak is on the road to writing, right? Because that's also communication, it's also expression. And so we want to have lots of opportunities for that. One project I've been involved in a number of pre-K classrooms is where children make videos of something they're an expert on. And that might be, we have like how to ride a bike. We once had a boy who did how to zip coats. That's his expertise. That's great. Learning to be able to speak to your expertise orally, that's going to lay a beautiful foundation that
Yeah.
will allow children to be able to communicate their expertise in writing as they go through the education system.
Yeah. Once we move, Lisa asked the question. I think we'll take it as our last, and we'll wrap up. But Lisa asked the question in grade 1, and I'll go to you first, Elisabeth. But please, no, I'm sure you have some opinions about this. When teaching sentence construction, there are probably different camps in how you should do that. Would you explicitly teach word class in grade 1? Example, noun, verb, etc.
It's not where we begin. We're thinking about what makes a sentence and having a complete thought. And we use the structure of a naming part and a telling part. Who or what is the sentence about, and what are they doing? And beginning there helps students really, I don't know if in the example we shared with CAPS, what makes this a complete thought helps students sort of internalize what a sentence is. It doesn't mean we're not going to teach what is a noun, what is a verb, what is an adjective, but it's not where we begin when we're thinking about sentence construction. More when we're thinking about word choice or what word we'll use here.
Great. I agree with Elisabeth and just want to add that we want to keep a close eye on state standards when making that decision, Lisa, because this is one of those areas where states do differ one to the
Yeah.
next, whether they're expected and therefore testing if they have benchmark assessment for K2 children's knowledge. So keep an eye on those state standards as well to see whether it's just that they need to understand the concept of noun,
Right.
or do they actually need to know the word noun?
Yeah.
So that's something I would take a look at.
Yeah. Are they using nouns and verbs, or do they need to explicitly distinguish between them on a piece of paper? Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
Great. Well, thank you both so much for joining us today. And thank you to all people who attended.